Some, or maybe even most of these words may sound a bit dated today, and of course we don't use them in everyday speech, but we know what they mean, or at least we can take an educated guess. Cyberpunk, however, is not quite so easy to define. Hey you, Pixel here. This is part 1 of a deep dive into cyberpunk. Not just 2077, which will be the main focus, but the overall genre. Now, personally, I've been a huge fan ever since watching Blade Runner for the very first time. And I thought I knew my way around cyberpunk pretty well, but you know how it is. You open up some scientific books, take notes, watch some movies, take more notes, reread all of your cyberpunk literature, take even more notes, compare all of that, and head straight into your next existential crisis because turns out you didn't know jack after all. So I've learned tons of new things and I would love to share all that with you. So let's dive right in, get the etymology and definition right out of the way so we can get to the juicier stuff in the next videos. And yes, I know what you're thinking, so etymology, definition, she's going to turn this into a history lesson. This is important and we will be coming back to this. So, let's go. Cyberpunk is present throughout many books, movies, games, and comics. It's not exactly a mainstream genre, but it does have a decent fan base. 2077 and the show Altered Carbon on Netflix gave cyberpunk a bit of a popularity boost in the past years, so that even if this isn't necessarily your go-to genre, you'll still know exactly what you're looking at. The story takes place in a technologically advanced city which is as busy, vibrant, majestic, ruthless, underrated, industrial, timeless, inspiring, intense, fresh, resilient, creative, dynamic, dangerous, expensive, breathtaking, photogenic, and bustling as the metropolises we know in real life. But the big difference is, we're not quite there yet. Cyberpunk is set in the foreseeable future. Arguably, the most visually striking elements that make us go, yep, that's cyberpunk, are of course the fluorescent lights, shiny ads, and holographic projections in densely populated areas. And they are literally everywhere, at eye level, above, or reflected in the puddles on the ground. They remind us of expensive and elaborate light installations in the hearts of our own big cities, just, well, a lot edgier and quite a bit more provocative. Taking a closer look at the seemingly uniform crowds of these megapolises, you'll find that no person is just like the other. We've got striking individuals in flashy outfits, vibrant hair and makeup, crazy tattoos, prosthetic limbs, and other body part replacements such as visibly implanted circuitry. In fact, you'll find high tech pretty much wherever you look. People embrace it as an integral part of their lives. Humanoid androids blend into the environment like it's no big deal, and weapons are just as common a sight as the heaps of refuse scattered along the sidewalks, disguising the addicted and the homeless. Steam rises through the vents and grates from the sewers. Vehicles drive on the ground and fly up in the air, and there seems to be no end to this dark jungle of neon and steel. And just like in our metropolises, prevalent in cyberpunk is this big rift between the so-called lowlifes, which make up the majority of the population, and the elite few who aggressively run the city from the safety of their massively fortified corporation buildings. And that's kind of all there is, right? A futuristic take on nightlife in a big city? Not quite. Let's break it down. Let's go back 80 years, give or take, and take a look at the compound title Cyberpunk.
cyber is the prefix of the word cybernetics, which derives from the Greek term kybernetes. Which means leader or pilot, or respectively the verb kybernan, to steer or to pilot. The term was first coined in 1948 by the mathematician Norbert Wiener in his book Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine. It is a very broad term, and it is used not only when addressing the field of technology. It can be applied to various fields of studies: engineering, biology, social sciences, to name a few. Individuals researching cybernetics are interested in how physical and mathematical laws influence certain events and what kind of regularities can be established. In other words, cybernetics describe the pattern of how any system reacts to an input signal, how it processes it, and how it outputs a definitive reaction accordingly. Let's place a test subject on a flat surface, a cat. I'm commanding the cat to perform a trick. Sit. The cat does nothing. Let's add a variable to the equation, a treat. I am positioning the treat visibly in front of the cat and giving it the same command. Sit. Look at how happily the cat complies now. What a good boy! This is no different from a wire conducting electricity to make a light bulb spark. Remove the electric current and the light will go out. That's cybernetics.
I need to teach my cat to do that. Oh wait, it is my cat. Fast forward 20 years. In the 1960s, the computer has already proven to be an invaluable asset to scientific research programs and large businesses. And by computer, I mean, of course, a fully staffed room filled with big devices which calculate numbers and also have the function to store that information. It is the introduction of the first mini-computer which boosts the field of computer science tremendously. The DEC Programmed Data Processor 1, or PDP-1, is a computer system which includes a CRT, or cathode ray tube graphic display, as well as an input system called DEC tapes, which allows the exchange of data and programs in and out of core memory. The PDP-1 does not require any air conditioning and can even be used by only one operator. Reducing the size of the computer while optimizing its functionalities opens up new possibilities and makes way for incredible ideas and concepts about how this new technology can be put to use in the future. So, our clever computer specialists have expropriated the broad term cybernetics from the 40s. Its original meaning has almost been forgotten and now holds an exclusively technological and all-futuristic undertone. To sum it up, the prefix cyber now relates to anything happening in the world of electronic communication and virtual spaces. So far, so good. What about punk? Punk is a socially critical movement that has its origins in the UK, and it followed an array of smaller movements. From the sudden empowerment of the youths right after World War II over certain subcultures like the mods and bikers, until the economical, social and political circumstances in the UK grew so dire that they led to excessive riots against the government in the 1970s. The young people were tired of being seen as the mob which needed to be numbed down and pacified. So they rose up to fight against capitalism, conformity, and generally speaking, the ruling body or the establishment. New music, emerged literally from the underground. Punk rock did not require the musicians to even be particularly skilled at their craft, because it wasn't about skill, it was about expressing raw emotions through loud beats and bass, through crude lyrics, unfiltered language, and, well, whatever else they could think of really to best get their message across.
But the point is, we're just, talking about youth again, singing songs about problems of everyday life. Yeah, and people have just been singing songs about science fiction, fantasy.
What relevance is like, I'll love my baby, and I'll shag my bird round the back street, or what relevance is that today? There are problems, which have been pushed underground for too long, which today, they have to be brought up to
People ain't got
life.
time to think about the cosmos and the universe,
Yeah.
and they ain't got any money to live on.
Yeah.
The same goes for the visuals. The bolder and the more provocative, the better, the more effective. Bright colors, striking prints, suggestive imagery, up to that point completely unimaginable hairstyles, the mohawk, shaved heads, frizzy cuts in vibrant hues were all worn with an attitude. It was all about standing for something while really sticking out.
The trousers all come with a little loincloth on the back. Everybody wants to know what that's for. It's just a loincloth. It's just a gesture of some kind of tribalism, really.
Style was everything, and that's an idea that still lives on, not only in the UK, but in the international fashion industry. You could say that the intention of punk was the rise of this new, bold generation over this old, long prevailing tradition. But it wasn't the first movement to do so. In fact, kids try to push their boundaries all the time. It's a natural process of life, and that's how it should be. However, punk was a collective movement that was loud enough to burn itself into our history books. And that brings us closer to the definition of cyberpunk. Alright, time to smash the two words together. So, on one hand, we've got computer tech, and on the other hand, rebellious youths with a bleak outlook on life. And we're somewhere in the realm of sci-fi. Okay, so obviously, science fiction literature has existed for many, many decades. I mean, you could even count Mary Shelley's Frankenstein among them, and that book is over 200 years old. Can you imagine?
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
As a rule, science fiction works usually portray any kind of technologically advanced experiments as something that should be treated with caution and the utmost respect. And for many reasons. For example, it could fall into the wrong hands, or it could even end up destroying its creator. And that's exactly why we need to distinguish between this broad and general approach to science fiction and the elements and motifs which are specific to the subgenre cyberpunk. Okay, so here are a few themes that we're going to be taking a closer look at. Foreseeable future, cyberspace, integration of tech into everyday life, robotics, alteration of the human body, urban dystopia. It all started in the 1980s. And that's the wondrous era of camcorders, videocassettes, the boombox, MS-DOS, Windows 1.0 and 360 kilobytes and 1.44 megabytes of removable PC storage. The first authors of cyberpunk were complete and utter nerds in the best sense of the word. Not all of them had studied maths, physics, or IT before picking up the pen, but they all had quite a healthy interest in the advancement of modern technology, and they understood its huge potential. To them, the computer was an immediate gateway to the future. So, what started out as short sci-fi publications in newspapers and very specific magazines pretty soon gained quick popularity among like-minded people. Short stories turned into books. which at times may seem to be a bit of a challenge to get into, but then again, these books were not meant for a broader audience. They were meant for people who are used to tech language, tech references, and processing lots of compressed information in their brain, I guess. Nerds.
A little more phase compensator. Up the sync signal. What do you see, Angel?
Clockwise rotation.
Right at the beginning of the decade, lots of computer games, video consoles, and other kinds of entertainment gadgets came out in rapid succession. The first portable computer, the laptop, was introduced in '81. And it was groundbreaking. This new digital era was unfolding right before the authors' eyes, and they of course couldn't help but wonder, what would that look like if taken to the extreme? Imagine everyone having access to computers and kids cutting teeth on code instead of nursery books. What kind of people would they grow up to become?
You know, I know what he's doing, and I know the games that he's programming and designing, but how he's doing it, I haven't the faintest idea.
Cyberpunk is usually set about 40 to 60 years in the future, which is a manageable time span in the sense that it's close enough to us today to still feature common and relatable things, yet leaving lots of room for breakthroughs in technology which could soon become our new standard. You know, things like electronic cash, credits, or other kinds of digital currencies as the only means of payment. Or something that is so common in futuristic media that we just cannot wait for the day to come: flying cars, holographic interfaces, and bionic vision. And of course, those things apply to big technological hubs much more than they do to small towns and villages. But speaking of living, a big city is not the only place one could choose to exist in. What if every single computer on this planet was linked up to one big global network, basically creating somewhat of a parallel universe or a cyberspace where people could communicate, interact, observe, run simulations, relive certain events or maybe even memories, or just exist away from the confinements of their mundane lives? That sounds oddly familiar. The internet as we know it today. AR, VR, mixed reality. Okay, quick side note. Rudimentary and very classified computer research networks such as ARPANET had already existed back then. However, those were little more than just linked up databases, to be honest. Anyway, Cyberpunk latched onto that idea, expanded it, and made this virtual reality essentially accessible to everyone. Or almost everyone. This concept of cyberspace was such an odd yet fascinating thing to imagine. So naturally, the only way to do it properly was the scientific way. When you strip the data flow into its core components, you're left with electric pulses which carry information. And this basic principle was very helpful when coming up with a visualization. Data clusters, i.e. generated pulses, would speed through a circuit diagram, a futuristic roadmap, along specific nodes to discharge at their destination. Now let's take a look at how the authors envisioned interacting with or accessing cyberspace.
You're entering a big error, Flynn. I'm gonna have to put you on the game grid.
Games? You want games? I'll give you games.
In the movie Tron, Kevin Flynn is a programmer who literally gets sucked, or rather cut out and pasted, into a computer game. So it falls entirely to himself to navigate the grid in any way possible. In Neuromancer, Case, a hacker or console cowboy, jacks into cyberspace via the Ono Sendai, a professional computer deck with an output for a headband with dermatrodes. Now those are essentially tiny electronic devices that pierce the skin, stimulate nerves, and generate a virtual reality. That very same deck is used by Johnny Mnemonic in the book. However, in the movie, Johnny interacts with cyberspace via an elaborate system of a VR set,
Password enter.
and data gloves.
Welcome to BRT Online.
Okay, so looks like our 1980s cyberpunk cookie-cutter protagonist needs to be some highly skilled and tech-wielding outcast, like a hacker or a netrunner. It needs to be the perfect subject to take up arms against the almighty corporations, compromise their systems, and end their reign to free the population from digital slavery, right? Well, that's actually more of a modern take. What I've just described, oppression, has come up in literature as early as the ancient Babylonian texts. It's the driving force of any dystopian literature. There's 1984 by George Orwell, one of, if not the most prominent example of a smothering totalitarian world.
Smith? 6079 Smith W? Yes, you. Bend lower. You're not trying. Watch me.
And this man's attempt to escape Big Brother, who is watching him wherever he goes and whatever he does.
There, brother. That's what I want.
And many others. Metropolis, A Clockwork Orange, Children of Men, Equilibrium, Brazil, Stalker, and so on and so forth. Oppression as a theme will never ever lose its popularity simply because it connects so well to the mainstream culture of every single generation. Think about it. Most people can relate very well to the struggles of a fairly inconspicuous protagonist, somebody who has been stripped of their rights, repressed by the system,
I volunteer as tribute!
and is pushed towards fighting for his or her beliefs, even if that means taking it up with the big cheese in the end. Now, don't get me wrong, oppression of course remains absolutely valid, and many modern cyberpunk stories often revolve around protagonists of poor or disadvantaged backgrounds. However, this is not what was originally intended by the authors of the 1980s. In fact, the characters of the proto-cyberpunk were very often connected with or even allied with corporations. There was no stereotypical definition of good guys or bad guys. Characters were generally presented in a way that hinted at a complex backstory, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about the protagonist or just a side character. Everyone came with their own personal, well-guarded past, their own demons, dark secrets, and all that was apparent in their looks and their behavior. Technophobia, as such, was not part of the proto-cyberpunk, but when it of course eventually did pick up a few years later, closer to the 90s, it was especially stressed in film, for much greater impact and of course for a much broader audience. You have to look at it from a real-life perspective. So, as soon as something, which in the past used to belong exclusively to the world of sci-fi, suddenly starts becoming more and more real, now that will inevitably grab much more attention from all sorts of places, really. And this is also where the clear distinction between cyberpunk and regular science fiction begins to get muddy again. You know, the same big old questions are seeping back in. Questions about the proper utilization, the expansion of the area of application, optimization of efficiency, cost reduction, future upgrades, modifications, you know, those kinds of questions. And this, of course, applies to any novelty product. The 1980s were full of new inventions, technological or otherwise, and it was becoming nearly impossible to escape the new and aggressive marketing strategies. TV and radio ads everywhere.
I used to be frightened by all the wine coolers I saw. I was scared I wouldn't pick the right one. Luckily, I did. It was the most refreshing one of them all, Sun Country Wine Cooler.
There's only one ketchup with this flavor pouring on that black thing. Ruffles, zigzagged ridges, got a zing of their own.
G.G. irons are now black and pepper. Travel line that goes in style, keeping fresh press every mile.
At home, coming from the loudspeakers in public places, all that constant information buzz, information noise that steered you towards buying this particular gadget or that particular brand of drink. So, cyberpunk captured that attitude, translated it and enhanced it into this futuristic sensory overload and explosion of neon, in-your-face holograms, mad audio design, virtual experiences, all fabricated, of course, by the corporations. And to the corpos, there was naturally no limitation on going bigger, brighter, louder, anything really, just to get the people's attention and, of course, their money, no matter the industry. And it's these exact things: virtual reality, facial ID scans, video calls, 3D printing, electronically enhanced limbs or prosthetics. All those gadgets or instruments which are effectively utilized today in public spaces, in the medical sector, in the entertainment industry. All that used to belong exclusively to the world of sci-fi and cyberpunk. AI voice assistants, smart electronics, smart appliances, and of course, robotics. Another typical element of cyberpunk in the 80s is the technological imitation of organic life. Robotics of the future will have made several quantum leaps so that it will be nearly impossible or impossible to distinguish humanoid or animal-like androids from the real deal. And it doesn't just stop at the visual level. These highly advanced robots will have the ability to learn, adapt, and even develop a consciousness of their own, which in turn questions our own human individuality and uniqueness.
The tortoise lays on its back, its belly baking in the hot sun, beating its legs, trying to turn itself over, but it can't. Not without your help. But you're not helping.
What do you mean I'm not helping?
I mean you're not helping. Why is that, Leon?
If they look like us, behave like us, think like us, dream like us, maybe even bleed like us, what makes them less worthy?
You're a bot. Yes, I am.
Cool. What can you do? Are you a robot too?
No, I'm human.
What can you do?
Today, projects like Sophia by Hanson Robotics or Amica by Engineered Arts keep blowing our minds and make us feel like we might be getting close to iRobot at some point. Who knows what will happen in the future, but this?
Be careful, sir. The instrument that you are handling could be a threat for your health.
Does not seem too far-fetched, to be honest. But why stop at robots? Why not give our own human bodies a well-deserved upgrade? Rats was standing by, his prosthetic arm jerking monotonously as he filled a tray of glasses with draft Kirin. The antique arm whined as he reached for another mug. It was a Russian military prosthesis, a 7-function force feedback manipulator, cased in grubby pink plastic. She held out her hands, palms up, the white fingers slightly spread. and with a barely audible click, 10 double-edged 4-centimeter scalpel blades slit from their housings beneath the burgundy nails. And that's another typical element of cyberpunk: prosthetic body part replacements. Fingers, hands, arms, legs, lungs, you name it. And incredible progress has been made in the medical sector since then. Aside from standard medical procedures like eye laser surgery, transplanting entire organs, and replacing bones with titanium components, just take a look at modern prosthetics. Myoelectric prostheses work by detecting muscle activity from the limb stump, feeding that into a battery-powered motor, and translating it into movements. Then there are spinal implants for paralysis, electronic brain implants such as DBS or deep brain stimulation, and even subretinal implants. Oh, and let's not forget that human tissue can now be 3D printed based on individual strands of human DNA. That's insane. I mean, are we actually going to become cyborgs one day? Let's take a look at the main location of cyberpunk, the street. Beneath the eclectic cacophony of neon signs and urban sounds, there's actually a pretty bleak and cynical scenery. And I guess you could easily draw comparisons to film noir.
Then they got a couple of pruning hooks from the garden and fished me out, ever so gently. Funny how gentle people get with you once you're dead. They beached me like a harpoon baby whale and started to check the damage just for the record.
No need to play it quiet. Not anymore. Breathe steady, old man. Prove you're not completely useless. What the hell? Go out with a bang. He likes to hear him scream. I've seen his victims and their twisted little faces, all wide-mouthed and bug-eyed, frozen in their last horrible moment of living. No screams. Either I'm just in time, or I'm way too late.
So, what is it exactly that makes cyberpunk so compelling to us? Well, to put it simply, it's close to home. It feels familiar and realistic because it takes mundane things and shrouds them in mystery. The idea is, what if our present-day factory complexes and boring office buildings were actually sinister organizations or secret cults? What would we encounter if we descended that rusty flight of stairs and walked down the badly lit corridor of a rundown residential structure? And what would we find behind that peeling door? A hacker's paradise, maybe? An illegal clinic or laboratory? What kind of gritty, parallel universe might be staring back at us through that curtain of fog in the dark of night? Even if we don't live in big technological hubs like the future Night City, Bay City, Newport City, or Blade Runner LA, cyberpunk suggests what our own capitals and technological hubs could look like in just a few more decades. You know, taking into account how political, economical, and ecological factors, drafts, epidemics, and global hunger may have shaped our societies. It's a thought experiment really about what life might look like for an average citizen. And it's not only about how technological advancement would shape our lives or things like the ever-increasing violence and cynicism, self-preservation, or the complete indifference to the surrounding world, rather than the similarity to our lives today. Even in the future, some things just don't change. In cyberpunk, we encounter lone wolves, technological savants, societal outcasts, insatiable addicts, bitter war veterans, opportunistic mercenaries, members of street gangs, and for the most part, the story is told from their perspective. They all seem to just hustle along, one way or another, taking the day as it comes. Now, I think that's something that every single one of us will have experienced at some point in life. There's this instant connection, some kind of kinship with these outsiders, if you will, who are just trying to find a place for themselves in an overwhelming environment. So, a buzzing, futuristic city that's a great representation of all that stress, anxiety, sense of insecurity, but also adrenaline, thrill, excitement, on so many levels, not just visually, of course. And in light of the current global trends, technology evolving at such speed, and the actual introduction of concepts for so-called smart cities, now I think a cyberpunk kind of future seems closer to us today than ever, but more on that later. So the plot of a cyberpunk story really is secondary. It's all about the overall familiarity of the setting in a not-so-distant dystopian on the inside and flashy on the outside future, and the direct environment of the protagonist. You know, the broad spectrum of people and things he or she encounters. That's the real selling point. And the crazy tech, and the neon lights, if you're into that. I might be into that. But lights and colors and what they do to your brain subconsciously, whether you like it or not, that's for another time, but I promise we'll get there. Yeah, this is about as broad as I'd like to keep things for now, and this already turned out way longer than I expected. Anyway, I hope you've learned something new today. If so, please hit like and subscribe, that would really help me out. You know the drill, but it doesn't hurt to say it, I think. Anyway, I really appreciate your time and thank you so much for sticking with me. Pixel out for now, but I'll see you in the next one. And let's go again, because we know how to do it. How physical or mathematical? Okay. And subcultures like the mods and bikers over... Cat, why? This is my chair, this is... Oh my god, this is awful. You know, as soon as I started to make this... Why am I... Wow. Now, let's do this one more time for safety. This term was first coined in 1948. This term was first coined in 1940... And just stored and then shared with, you know, your common... Why am I living? I'm a living... Most people can relate very... And outputs a definitive reaction accordingly. Lost it there. Cyberpunk as... Yeah, I don't know. Don't know about that. One more time. And I'm ad-libbing it.